Yes, I know alcohol markers on coloured cardstock can really stretch your supplies, but how about on some dark grey? I'm going to try that today and give you some tips along the way. Welcome back to another Take Two with Therese at Altenew, and today we're going to be using the beautiful botanical illustrations and set K, which is one of the new alcohol marker sets from Altenew. So there are 3 families of colours in here, and I thought it'd be fun to challenge myself just to use these colours. So I have swatched them out on some white cardstock, and I've also stamped out my image ready to go on both some Neenah 80 lb and also on some dark grey cardstock. So my first tip today is to swatch out your colours on the coloured cardstock that you're going to be using. It seems fairly obvious, but until you see how they look on the cardstock all swatched out, you really don't know for sure. Alright, so you're thinking to yourself, this isn't coloured cardstock. No, you're absolutely right. This is some 80 lb Neenah cardstock, and it's the one that I typically use for alcohol marker colouring, so it's something that I'm familiar with. And I have stamped my bouquet out, and if you hold on tight, a little bit later in the video I'm going to walk you through that as well. But I stamped it out in some permanent black ink because I know that's compatible with the alcohol marker, and by colouring this image first on some white cardstock that I'm familiar with, I'm going to learn the image and where the shadows are going to be, and it's going to be much easier for me to do my colouring on the dark cardstock. You certainly don't need to do this step, but I figured while I've got everything in place, why not make 2 cards instead of 1? Everything's out, I might as well use it. So typically I'm going to start my colouring with a darker shade, and I won't lay down too much colour. I'll just try and pick where the shadows are going to be on the image, and then I'll come in with the next lighter shade and feather that colour out. Alcohol markers will dry a little bit lighter, so that's just something to be aware of, but you can always come in and add more dark colour. It's just harder to take it away. So you're best, until you learn an image and how you want it to look, I would say less is best initially. So I also decided to, like I said, use a limited colour palette. So my leaves today are grey. Just something a little bit different, and I think it goes really well. This set of colours, these 3 colours together, I think look amazing. I have done exactly the same technique here where I've added some dark colour and then blended it out with the lighter one, and just sort of looked at a couple of spots where I thought some shading might be, and also where I want to leave some of the highlights. So I'm starting to get a really good feel about how I want to colour this image and how I want it to look. I did come in and add a little bit more depth with the grey markers around on the petals, just on the very edges as well. But I think I'm ready to tackle the dark cardstock, so let's go. Alright, so I am colouring it exactly the same. So I just thought I'd walk you through. I have found on this cardstock, if you look at the colours that I've swatched out to the side, so I found that the first colour blue just was looking too grey, and it wasn't giving me enough blue for the flower petals. So I basically focused on using the 2 middle blues, which is really interesting because I thought that the lighter blue would work. I don't know what made me think that, but basically by doing a similar shading technique that I did on the previous flower, I could add some depth on the edges of the petals, on the center of the petals, and then feather out a middle color or a lighter color and leave. Now, you can't really call it a white highlight, but if you did want to, and I did consider this, you could certainly come in with a pencil after and add an actual white highlight. I think that would look lovely, but I really just wanted to use my limited color palette today, like I said. Now, one thing to be aware of with colouring on cardstock that you're not familiar with is some cardstocks do not play well with alcohol markers. So it's the same with coloured cardstocks. Basically, when you're doing your swatching, you can feel how the ink is laying down on the paper and if there's going to be a lot of bleeding, because if there is, you're not going to get the nice crisp edges to the image that you want, and it's going to be a really frustrating experience. So if that's happening, I would suggest to maybe try a different coloured cardstock. I've kept today's colouring in real time and haven't included all of the images. I just thought it might give you an idea of exactly how I lay the colour down onto the cardstocks. But basically I just did the same technique on each petal of the flower and on each of the leaves. Now when I was colouring the leaf here, I did use the palest of the blues to create my grey leaf. Because of how it looks on that grey cardstock, it doesn't particularly look blue, it just looks like a nice warm grey. So that worked really well because I didn't want to make these leaves as dark as the ones that I did on the previous card. So that just meant I could come in with one of the darker greys and actually add some depth with that. And then I just blended it out with the pale blue. It's really hard to tell on that cardstock, but that is actually the blue. And I did the same technique where I came in, added the shadow, and then feathered it out with the lighter colour. And then I could just look at the total image and look where I wanted my shadows to be. And I actually added all the shadows and shading with the greys as well. So the centre of the flower, I decided to colour in the oranges from the set. You can see them. I do think they are quite muted on the grey, but I noticed that when I did my swatching out, you can actually see them, so that just added a little bit of fun. And again, I did some small shadows around the petals with one of the darker greys just to make them pop a little bit. Obviously, you don't have to use grey cardstock. I have used other coloured cardstocks, and actually I'll link in the description below a card that I had a lot of comments on in a recent release at Altenew, and that's what gave me the idea for this particular video. So if you want to check out another card, and I did that one on some green cardstock with these same markers, and the colours look totally different. Now when I stamp out my images, I do like to restamp them often, but I did actually restamp with some pigment ink the flower first, and then I did mask it, and I left the images in the MISTI, which is how I originally stamped them, and then I added the obsidian black again and restamped over the mask. I did add a piece of cardstock behind the panel, cut it down and popped it up on the front of an A2 card. It's a side fold, and stamped a sympathy sentiment from the Fragile Foliage stamp set. I thought this would make a beautiful sympathy card just because of those muted colours. Now the next card, I actually decided to add some jet black splatters and a sentiment which is from the Fancy Greetings set. I just kept both cards really simple. This is a panel of the 80-pound Nina. I actually added it to a card base from 110-pound Nina, and it was a side fold A2 card as well. I do hope you're inspired by today's video to colour on some coloured cardstock. If you did enjoy it, please click on the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. I've linked 2 more videos right here sharing some more Altenew Take 2 videos. I'll look forward to seeing you there. Till next time, happy paper crafting. Bye.